Alright, normally we're channeling a hotfix. Oh shit, I didn't even see this one. Whoa, I literally didn't see that. Interesting. Holy shit, let's get to that later. Wow, I didn't even see that. That's pretty crazy. That's surprising and I like it. So there's a patch and a hotfix. Now this patch I've skimmed, but skimmed is pretty light. So let's breeze through this. It's gonna be pretty small. So the big thing is that at the end of the day, it says next week you won't get an update, but in exchange, if all goes well, we'll start showcasing each of the new features as we approach release day. A lot of people, including myself, okay, so like the average person was expecting the update like this week or early next week. I was expecting it late next week, and a lot of other people were as well. Like October 17th was my personal guess. This is saying earliest case scenario is basically the 24th. And honestly, the phrasing on this is putting that at an optimistic spot. Like, showcasing each of the new features as we approach release day. Dude, damn dude, 24th could be a little early. Like, maybe it's the week after. Maybe it's November. Maybe this is Artifact 2.0. Maybe Artifact will launch before this. Yeah, like, damn. That's definitely, that's a large oof. I'm feeling that one, you know, because I wasn't really hoping for one this week. I was basically sure that it was going to be next week. At the end of the day, wow. Okay. I mean, I don't think it'll take too much longer. I would still put it at the 24th personally. 24th seems pretty likely as of now, but you know, that's still in 2 weeks. So I'll definitely personally be playing, you know, some other games in that time. I'll play some Underlords. I do want to get up to like, you know, top 20, top 10 ladder at least. But yeah, let's breeze through this. Okay. Fixed an issue where all damage done by Medusa's is a factor while scaled units do damage to units near them would be credited to Medusa only. That makes sense. Okay. Batrider has a similar bug with multiple Batriders. Forced an issue where units could be forced to attack untargetable units. Pod chokes an undying unit, right? Okay, and change this. Nature's Intendant. Fixed an issue where the wrong heal amount was displayed on the ability tooltip. So this is actually quite interesting. Apparently the wrong heal amount was on the tooltip this entire time. Wait. So what information changes off this? I mean, we kind of know how good the hero is without needing, you know, the tooltip. It says it heals 40 health every 1.5 seconds. What did it say before? Did it say 20? Because it did say something lower than that, right? Either way, I mean, obviously this doesn't change the hero, it just changes the tooltip, which I don't think anyone was judging it changes his power level by. There's certain heroes that, like, changing their tooltip would actually be, like, news. Like, people would judge their power level by their tooltip instead of just their experience playing it. But in this case, that's not really going to change anything. Entangling Claws. To fix an issue where Entangling Claws would never be cast. So that's Lone Druid's Bear's passive stun proc. And it got bugged a week or two ago that it never got hit. And nobody run Lone Druid since, basically. Now Lone Druid's better. What are the implications here? Savages isn't a real build, so Good Stuff is basically the only build that can really fit in Spirit Bear for a spot. And now they can fit it in a little bit more. And Viper's max mana is now 50, which changes almost literally nothing. When they reduced Viper's ability to cost 50, they forgot to change his max mana to reflect that. So he had 100 max mana with 50 to cast the ability, which actually changed almost nothing. So this isn't really changing his power. It's like having that max mana did basically nothing for him given his cooldown before. It wouldn't really change anything. So yeah, that's not gonna do much. Big time contract. Pillar can now get more of one of this item again. Now this does change down here in the alliances, so we have to revisit both of these together. Target buddy can no longer be healed. What sources even healed target buddy? I mean, most things didn't heal it, right? I think. What even did heal it? I guess there were just like 1 or 2 things in the entire game that healed it, because I do know like most things don't work on this. Most heals wouldn't have worked. Healing word, Kipo. Yeah. Did Warlock heal it? I don't think Warlock healed it. Necro and Change maybe. I don't think any of those healed it. I mean, to be honest, if Necro did used to heal it, which I don't believe it did, but I might be mistaken, then this is actually a legitimate nerf, because the Necker heal, you know, is something you're always gonna have on your board in good stuff, and Target Buddy is pretty often a pick. It's like, it's definitely an early snap. Mask of Madness, yeah, Target Buddy can no longer use Mask of Madness, which kind of sucks. It's always a good mask carrier early on. Bloodbound, okay, let's get into this. And then the big change is really the hotfix that came tomorrow. I think Valve. So these hotfixes, these are kind of funny. I'll read them with context in a second though. Bloodbound. When a Bloodbound unit dies, it gives 120 attack damage in addition to any existing Bloodbound bonus it has to a random friendly Bloodbound unit. So before, when a Bloodbound unit dies, they gave 125% attack damage to every Bloodbound unit. And now this just keeps it a single buff that sort of chains and reapplies. So let's evaluate. Let's actually try to evaluate how this is. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up some notepad document or something. And hopefully I'm understanding this correctly. We'll have to see if there's like some change in this that I'm not really sure of. But let's just go ahead and throw up some notepad document for us. There we go. Bam. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete our old thing. We have. Let's imagine a scenario where we have. I mean, we weren't really using a lot of Bloodbound before. Let's imagine a scenario where we have 3 Bloodbound units. Okay, so old, 1 dies to gain 125% equals 250% total. After 1 dies, 2 dies, 1 gains 125%. So 125% basically stays on the last one to live. But it's not really a net gain, because the second one that dies lost its 125% and transferred it to the third one, right? Let's look at new. Let's see how this changes. Okay. So we've got 3 units again. This is new. 1 dies, 1 gains 125%. So 1 dies, you're at 125% total on the buff. Now this is interesting. 2 dies, 1 gains 250%, right? Because it keeps the buff. So when 1 unit dies, it's less good. When 2 units out of 3 dies, when 2 units out of 3 dies, your last unit is gonna have 250%, right? Which is interesting. Whereas before, it was random unit. Yeah, basically. It's just like, it gives its Bloodbound buff to a random friendly Bloodbound unit. The fact that it's random is definitely a little awkward, but you're not really running like full Bloodbound boards anyway, right? It's the same for 2. I think it should be, yeah. After 2 dies, the last unit is gonna have 250%, which is the same for after 2 dies. But when you have 1 die, it's one of your random 2 has 125 instead of 2 of them having 125. Which is to say that having a single Bloodbound is definitely, or sorry, having a single Bloodbound pair. So like if you have a sacrifice and something getting big, it's basically the same. And if you have 3 Bloodbound, it's only a bit worse, where it's like if 1 dies, you only have 1 buff instead of 2 buffs. But overall, it's quite a bit worse. The concept of it, rather. Each death will give more of a bonus now. It's still 125%, right? It's 125% attack damage. Each death shouldn't give more of a bonus. I mean, so basically, if you have 3 Bloodbound, there's no reason to have more than 3 or 4 right now. If you have 3 Bloodbound, the new version is always worse than the old one, but when you're on your last Bloodbound, both versions should be the same. Let's do 4, just to make sure I'm not, like, logically missing something. I just want to, you know, make sure. So olds, 1 dies and 2 dies is still going to be the same. 1 dies is 375% total. Olds, 2 dies. So after 2 die, then you have 4 buffs total because you have 2 stacked buffs on 2. And 4 buffs total is going to be an easy 500%. Old. 3 dies, you're back down. When 3 dies, you're back down to 375%, right? Back to 3 buffs on 1 unit. And 4 dies, you're always down to 0. So new, 1 dies, 125%. New, 2 dies. It just scales up, right? It's just 250%. New, 3 dies, 375%. So yeah, exactly like the old system, you'll see that on, like, when you're on the last unit, it will still be the same. That is how that works. But when you're on when you're like you're getting half value when you're at half your units, which is woof. That's really bad. And at 1 unit, I mean, here we're getting a third value. So it's like a third, half, and then it catches up, right? Now these are counting, of course, the total amounts of buffs that are on your board. So 125% is your base. I guess I should explain this first if it wasn't clear. 125% is your base buff. So yeah, it's a big nerf, basically. So let's go ahead and look at this change as a whole then. So buff's a random one, which kind of sucks even worse. And I guess this is counterbalanced by the fact that you can get more big time contracts. It definitely becomes less worth it to actually have. I think overall this is a nerf to the item. It's a little weird that they would nerf this item. I mean, I don't think I hate this nerf. It sort of relegates big time contract into the sort of like low tier status that it is effectively supposed to be. And I get the idea behind this nerf. Big time contract is the kind of concept that sort of limits design space in a specific way. Now here's the thing about the limit design space arguments. I think it's a meme argument. I really do. So okay, so from a game design standpoint, there's a buzz phrase that goes around, which is limits design space, which is this concept that in theory certain abilities mean you can no longer add a certain thing to your game, right? For example, let's say you have some neutral card, or yeah, well, neutral cards don't even exist in this game. Yeah, let's just give big time contract as the example. So it's hard to print units like Luna and Arc Warden that have such scalable abilities to attack, and it's particularly hard to print more Bloodbound units, right? So it's not impossible that part of the reason that they're changing this is because they want to do something that won't really allow this item to fly in the next update. Could be. I personally think when it comes to limiting design space, at the end of the day, it is kind of a meme argument. It is good to have things in your game that limit design space, because you're looking at it the wrong way if you're looking at things in terms of limiting design space. It is always the concepts that are most scalable and most interesting that are going to be limiting your design space in a game. That's the most important takeaway, and that's why it's kind of a meme argument. Anything that is scalable will make it harder to design new stuff. Like, people will always say, you know, if you have a game that has too little design space, you've got too many scalable cool concepts, then it's like, oh, we can't print anything, we can't make new concepts because I'm being blocked by my old concepts, sort of being painted into a corner design-wise, so to speak. And at the end of the day, you can just change it before you do anything, right? The thing people don't realize is when you have too much design space, that means your game is boring as shit, right? When you have a game and you're a designer and you have too much design space, that means that you don't have scalable abilities, you don't have scalable concepts, and your game is kind of bland and uninteresting. Personally, I would use current Gwent as a good example of that. Although some people like current Gwent. I mean, it depends on the person in question. But, so yeah, it's important to balance. You want a certain amount of design space. That's true. But people always say too little is bad and forget that too much is probably even worse, I would say. Or at the very least, just as bad. Okay, so basically, what I'm seeing this as is I can see why they would change this if they're about to change something else. That's, you know, might make a contract a little more busted, or if they have more of a plan with this item. I can say right now, this item is basically unpickable, and it was kind of weak before, right? The most important thing to understand about this is it was an item with a pretty low play rate as of like the last week at a top level, and they nerfed it. And that seems weird to people. But there's two reasons why they might have done that. A, maybe they're about to change something. I guess they're not patching next week, so it would be the big patch if this is true. They could change something that, you know, makes this scale in a way. Maybe that's their plan for this, or possibly they're being a little bit preemptive. Because to be honest, I mean, the only reason that big time contract is a lot less picked than it was before was because there's less tier 2 items in the pool. Or sorry, there's more tier 2 items in the pool these days, so it's kind of harder to double or triple up on contracts than it was before. So maybe it could be a sign that they're changing the item amounts or something like that. I could definitely see big time contract, if left untouched, being kind of like a meta threat in the future. So I don't mind that they're being a bit preemptive with this one, to be honest. I mean, we've all had a bit too much exposure to big time memes. That being said, I don't know. I think if they were going to do this, I wish they had changed maybe something else. Like one other thing. One other tweak to kind of rebuff this. Because I do like how they've made it a lot less scalable. I think I like this concept of a design better, right? So big time contract, I mean, and we're just talking from a pure design standpoint. I know some of you just want me to wrap this big time contract bit up and do this fucking TLDR style. But let me make one last point. Big time contract to me, from a design standpoint, is supposed to be, kind of a meme item, sure. It's not really supposed to be a super serious strategy. It's supposed to be like tier 3 or tier 4 sort of weak strategy that can get some places sometimes. You pick it like early, and if you double up on contract, your strategy can go off. The big problem with that is that in its current form, it's definitely a little too potentially powerful. Like, what it's supposed to do is engineer hilarious situations where you have one really, really big unit. And it still does that just as well. It's just a weaker card, right? Like at the end of your board, your big unit is just as big. Your last survivor is just as big. Which I like. I like that concept of redesign. And it makes it like less abusable if you got 2 contracts, you can't have like a super nuts board. I just think at the end of the day that they could have maybe like buffed it a bit more to compensate or something like that. I'm not sure precisely how. Maybe 150% would have been too high or something, because this is definitely a lot weaker. It makes it better for like to play a Bloodbound pair, or right now, it makes it worse to play a Bloodbound pair It makes it the same value to play a Bloodbound pair, and it makes it worse to play It makes it worse to play 3 Bloodbounds, much worse to play 4, and much worse to play 5, right, etc. Like, that's how this change has gone. I wish they had made it so it's like much worse to play 4, but a bit better to play 2. And I think that's kind of better design, because it kind of makes it a bit more contained of a strategy and a bit more balanceable. Anyway, I digress. That's way too long of a discussion about this change. At the end of the day, don't pick big time contracts. I mean, if you see it on 2 super early, I mean, I think I just wouldn't take this competitively. If you see it super early, I mean, you can definitely take it, a single big time contract from an early spot. But what you're relying on is not only to see a second one later, but you're relying on seeing a second one when there's a low opportunity cost in that pack. Because, like, the thing is, if you see a second one and you're picking that second one over, like, a Maelstrom, is that even necessarily better? Like, I would rather just have a different item for my first one and a Maelstrom or something like that, right? So, yeah. Bloodbound's not doing too much. And Savage changed allied Savage units to
for 815 attack damage each time they land an attack on an enemy or cast a damaging spell. So that's the change, or cast a damaging spell, which is buff to Venomancer and Sand King, which is pretty hilarious because, of course, yeah, I mean, Venomancer is a non-unit, and Sand King... Where do you run Sand King? I mean, you can run it in 3 assassins, you can run it in 6 assassins. That's kind of it. It's a bit of an underrated unit, but at the end of the day, it's a unit you're playing for its assassin tag or its savage tag. It has pretty weak and inflexible tags. That's the biggest thing that differentiates it from like other like AoE stun abilities. It also has kind of Pepega and abusable AI. I can guarantee you, if Sand King was a better unit, it still wouldn't be that good, because people would learn to counter its very predictable and very weak AI, because it always goes into a diagonal on the furthest enemy in its range, and you can kind of make it only stun like 1 or 2 enemies because of that. So Sand King, it's a niche unit. Honestly, if it had like 1 relevant tag, it would be a lot better, but I don't think this end change changes much. But then we've got to go to the hotfix, because this changes savage. So here we go, guys. This is it. So a bit of context. These hotfixes are always kind of funny, because it really seems... Okay, so at this point, there's a pattern with these, like, kind of same day or evening after hotfix, which is basically that Valve is reading the Reddit comments, right? That's basically what's happening. So Valve is going to Reddit/r/underlords. And they're reading some of these comments. Wait. Let me actually pull this up. We can't bear this bug anymore. Yeah, all right. So can't bear this bug anymore. Let's just see what a couple of these are. So, because this is the context, and this is actually pretty funny. If you have Valve still has no idea what to do with Savage Alliance, mark your square. Ouch. Honestly, not surprised. Anyone who got their hopes up before week of October 17th set expectations too high. So this is super completely correct. I mean, even then that week is stretching it for Valve time. Honestly, apparently, I mean, proved me wrong. I was thinking 17th was likely. Oh well. Next week you want to get an update, rip. Still no demon bug fix. Come on, yeah. Like, look at that. Like, it's just like Valve knows that these like bugs like demon buff are the problem. When, you know, visual effect. Okay, sure. 2 more weeks of 6 warriors. I'm gonna head out. You can say I upvoted that. But yeah. So this is kind of like the context of this update, and it's pretty funny. So you can see like Valve basically releases the patch, and then they read the Reddit comments, and this has happened a few times. This happened with some of like, what was the big one? There was one big patch that was like, was it? Oh, the one after the tiny update. Oh yeah, people were like, oh, Arc Warden and Enigma is still OP. Yeah, it was the big Enigma nerf. So it's like, and they nerfed Disruptor as well. Which honestly was a nerf. Yeah, this did actually nerf Disruptor at the end of the day. So that actually ended up being good. But yeah, it's like, you know, the tiny update came out and everyone was super pissed. And then they were like, oh, let's read the Reddit comments and let's see what our problems with the game are. Reduce the chances of finding tier 4 units by 5%, which, you know, they should have done that a while ago. And then there's 100 less health on Arc Warden, which is adorable. That's a cute nerf right there. Et cetera, right? It's like they nerfed good stuff a bit on this day. It still makes it the best to build in the game, but I mean, it took it from being like super hyper auto pick to just you should pick this if you want to climb. Okay, so now they read these Reddit comments and they're like, okay, fixed an issue where units channeling was interrupted. It would never cast at a higher power than that. This affected Keeper of the Light and Windrunner. Once a unit's channeling was interrupted, it would never cast. So it's like if you get your first channel interrupted and then you cast again, it would be at the same power level. Even in the later cast, they channel the entire time. So that's a very minor bug, but it technically does affect Coddle and Windrunner. So it's technically making those units a slight amount stronger. Very, very, very minor though. And here they fixed the demon bug. Fixed the long-standing issue where more than one of the same type of demon would still invalidate the Demon Alliance. So this is a
big change. This is a buff to good stuff in a pretty major way. Okay. So let's evaluate this, because we've all kind of thought a demon bug change would come for a while. So demon bug, for those of you guys who don't know, I've mentioned it a lot on my videos. I talk about this a lot. It's what stops me from building certain things like Doom 3. More on that later. But basically, when you have two demons of the same name, they cancel each other's demon bonus. They're not supposed to do this, and visually on the Alliance tab, it didn't show them doing this, but their demon damage was gone. So this got fixed because they, they're reading Reddit and they're like, well, looks like this is a problem, This is a buff to good stuff. Good stuff is kind of like the ultimate build that can run 2 level 2 Dooms. And it's a really, really, really big buff to Doom 3, which is a legit win condition in good stuff now. Now, Doom 3 is something I didn't really build before. I would very, 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 very rarely build a Doom 3. I've done it once in over 100 games with good stuff, I think. Or at least about 100 in the past, like, a month or so. So, yeah. I mean, Doom 3, I'm building in like 1% of games, maybe 2% at most. Because 3-star 4 costs are just way too expensive. You can't really get them early. Sure, you can get a first place if you go for it and you hit it, but you're always gonna be dropping like ranks. You're gonna be bleeding so many ranks by like benching these Dooms and hurting your roll timings. And the biggest thing, I always say, if you've heard me say this, when it comes to 4 costs, here's the rule of thumb. If you would put a second level 2 4 cost of that unit on your board, then yes, you go for the 3-star. Because at that point, you're not really going for the 3-star. You're just building a second 2-star, and then when the 3-star happens on top of that, it's a bonus on top of that. But when you're going for something like a Tide Hunter or something like an Alchemist or a Necrophos that you can't run 2 of on your board, then suddenly it's like, I'm benching this second 2-star. I'm on the hope for this super, super long odds 3-star, and that's just a bad play. You can't really do that. That's almost always going to be a misplay. Basically always going to be a misplay. So this completely changes the context of that, because now 2 Dooms can hit my board without bugging each other and removing the demon buff, right? So now I build, like, the 4th Doom I find, I click it. The 5th Doom I find, I click it. I'm going to build a second Doom 2. That's going to be on my board. It'll, free up the Arc Warden slot, and we will go for Doom 3s more often. Doom 3s you're going to see at the end of the game more. Just because it makes more logical sense to even go for them now. What else does this change? Not too much. I mean, you can look at Assassin progress. Sometimes you can run, like, 2 level 2 quaps for a little bit. That does happen a bit, but it's not very impactful when it does, and it doesn't really, you don't really, tend to go for it very often. I mean, it's mostly just a Doom buff, which is a good stuff buff. Like, they're buffing, like, warriors and good stuff by doing this, which makes sense, At the end of the day, there's this pattern. I'll talk about this pattern at the end of this video. But there's a bit of a pattern. Tweet Savage numbers to 7, 15, 25 from 4, 8, 15. Whoa! So, big buff to Savage. I mean, I dig it. I think I saw some posts on Reddit that were saying Savage was poorly designed and they should go back to the old, like, buff your whole team percentage based. I mean, I kind of agree with it being in a weird design spot right now. I think that's a terrible idea, though, to go back to the old, like, buff your entire team percentage beast. Like, first of all, it was kind of a clone of Heartless, but it was always much worse. So, it usually wasn't worth completing. You'd complete, like, a tier of it sometimes if it's super open. Like in Warriors, because back then, like, Tusk and Lycan you're getting for free. But even then, that was, like, the big boy build, and I still, like, scooped off of it to get Tiny. And lost that 10% for that throw, because Tusk was like a non-unit back then. Sure. I don't mind the current design, honestly. I'm down to try this new version with bigger numbers. It's a huge buff. I mean, 4 Savages doubles up. It goes from 8 to 15. That's almost a full double, which is absolutely insane.
I honestly, maybe 4 Savages can be back to like our early game for good stuff. At the end of the day, will 6 Savages be decent? I mean, the scaling is still, I would say, a little too weak. I mean, it goes from 15 to 25. What was the old bleed scaling? The old bleed scaling was 5, 10, 15, right? So 15 on 6 units, because it's applying to those units specifically, is going to be 90, and 10 on 4 is going to be 40. And it's, let's just, I'll do this in, you know, that good old notepad document. I want to start using this more. We can clear this up. So let's do Savage scaling. Olds is 5, 10, 15, right? That's the old bleed, right? So we can take a look at this and we can say, okay, it scales linear, but it doesn't. It really doesn't, because that is per unit. So what old is really is 10, 40, 90, which is good scaling. That's really good. So it quadruples up from 2 to 4, and then it basically doubles up from 4 to 6. Now the reason this is because of course it's per unit. So when you have 2 units, it's doubles. When you have 4 units, it quadruples, and when you have 6 units, it sextuples, something there. Now let's look at new. So new, well, let's look at old new. So old new was 7, 15, or no, that's new. 4, 8, 15, right? And you'll notice the rank 3 is pretty good. So again, this is per unit, so old new ends up being 8, and then 32, and then 90 again. So this one quadruples, and then instead of doubling, it triples. So the scaling favored 6 Savages a bit before in its current form, or in its slightly old form. This is, of course, in the last like week or two it's done this. Has it been 1 week or 2? Time is operating on a weird level these days. Okay. Now new. Here we go. This is the interesting one. 7, 15, 25. Because of course this is all ratioing. I'm not like saying anything is good or bad necessarily, but it's an important practice. So new with per unit is of course 14, 60, and then 25 by 6 is 150. So we can see here it's following the same pattern of quadrupling up from 1 to 4. It's slightly more than a quadruple, or sorry, from 2 to 4. Slightly more than a quadruple here. And then here we're going by, what is that, just 2.5 times? 2.5 times, which is somewhere in the middle of these. Somewhere in the middle of these for sure. And it's 2 to 4 is going a bit better. So what this says to me personally, I mean, if this is good enough to go to the late game, I'll be surprised. What this says to me is 4 Savages is likely still going to be your sweet spot. So you might look at this situation and you might say, wow, that's so weird. If 6 Savages really is doubling or tripling or 2.5 timesing your value, why is 6 considered worse than 4 and has been considered worse than 4 for months by everyone? Why is that? And the reason is because opportunity cost rises. So think of it in this way specifically. Strategy in games is always about combining 2 factors together. It's always 2 factors. You are combining the ability to play for a condition with the ability to capitalize off that condition, okay? That's it. It's really simple. Force a condition, capitalize off that condition, okay? So break it down. Aggro deck in Hearthstone, for example, is built to force a fast game and capitalize on a fast game, right? Like you have different cards that are going to take 2 factors. Control decks in, you know, I use Hearthstone because it's more popular than Magic, but I guess a lot of my viewers watch Magic. Any of those like tempo-based card games, Gwent is kind of an exception because there's no tempo in Gwent in the same way. It means something different. But control in those games means you force a slow game and you capitalize off a slow game, right? And you have different cards that fulfill different functions. So, like, for example, in a control deck, I'll have a card that stalls the game, that forces a long game, and then I'll have, like, a late game big finisher card, and that's my game that capitalize off of that late game condition. But when you're deck building, these are the two fundamental factors that you are meshing together. Force, capitalize. That's it. Okay, and you see that in these games as well, right? So for example, the reason you want to have like a pretty similar amount of like damage per second to tankiness is because tankiness forces like longer fights, and then damage per second capitalizes off of those longer fights, right? If you're not trying to force longer fights, if you're running something like mages are kind of like, for a per fight version, they are kind of the aggro version. You're forcing a shorter fight. You're not trying to run like tanky units. Maybe you'll run one tank to try to keep your mages alive long enough to cast, but you're just like blowing your load early and hoping the reaches are hard enough to kill all your opponent's units, right? Basically, right? That's the idea. So you're not trying to stall out boards. You're going to be more in the market for stuff like Dagon and less in the market for stuff like Maelstrom, on average, right? Not that Maelstrom is bad in mages. That's not my point at all. But like, you know, relative to like those cards' powers, you're going to see skews in that direction, right? So let's bring this back to Savages. So why is 6 Savages bad? Because you're committing everything on your board to capitalizing off of a condition. Both versions of Savage, whether it's the bleed or the plus attack, they need these long fights. That's the whole point. You need to be having a really long fight because you're getting plus damage per attack, right? So you can look at this like, wow, I'm doubling when I go from 4 to 6. But you can also look at it like, wow, if I just add like some warriors or warlocks to my board and slow the fight down, that I'm forcing these longer fights that my 4 Savages can better capitalize on, and I'm scooping for like the 2 bad Savages a little bit less. So that's the biggest reason, and very important to understand, why 6 Savage has been worse than 4 for a long time. It's because you're committing all your, like, so much of your board into capitalizing off of a condition rather than trying to split that with forcing that condition, right? You need some stuff that will slow down the fight to empower the Savage you already have, okay? That being said, I don't know. I mean, if this buff is big enough, which I personally doubt that it's going to be huge, if this buff is big enough, it's not impossible 6 Savage could get there. Tusk is better than it has been in the past, for sure. It's like warrior adjacent. Sand King is definitely an okay unit. And Lone Druid can root now. Enchantress is probably the biggest flaw with going 6. Going 6 just forces you to have an Enchantress and a Venomancer on your board. And these two are basically non-units. Venomancer has the Warlock Alliance, which is not useless. Especially with what Savages want to play for. But it's not a good unit, and neither is Enchantress. I would be pretty surprised if 6 Savages was any way to play them at all. 4 just seems to be better. But it's not impossible. 6 could creep up. At the end of the day, though, the biggest downside to 6 Savage is that it's always been a transitional build. It's always been something that falls off kind of late because, you know, they ramp up early in these fights, and late fights you get less attacks off. There's like more stuns, things blow up left and right. There's a lot more chaos in these late fights, so it's harder. You don't have these like attrition based like tap fights as much. There's too much that can go wrong, and it's a lot more about these AoE abilities than it is about these auto attacks. So I don't think Savages stay in their build. It might be a new viable transition point for good stuff. Back in the day, you know, for the past like couple months before it got nerfed, it was kind of the go-to transition for good stuff. They didn't have to go into Savages early, but most people did, including me. You'll see a lot of that, and maybe that'll be the case again now. So this might be a good stuff buff, or it might still be bad. I'll definitely be trying this out. This is a big buff. It's like Tusk and Lycan feel like they get a lot better from this, for sure. So yeah, it's a huge buff, but keep in mind, Savages were pretty unplayable before. So yeah. I will say Lycan is super important for those of you guys who don't know with Savage builds. A lot of like how Savages work right now is because they get plus attack damage, they do synergize with crits. And Savage has 2 crits built in, which are Lycan and Tusk. So when you get a Lycan level 3, that's how 4 Savages can work. Like with this new 4 Savage buff, he's gonna be chunking. He's gonna be pretty scary if you see a Lycan level 3 in some kind of 4 Savage builds. So maybe that will be some kind of late game board condition that can get places. I'm personally not hopeful. I personally think they're still either a transitional build or they're just kind of weak. But, you know, I could be wrong about that. That's something maybe 4 Savages will actually be a little spooky now on these new numbers. We'll see. In our internal playtest, the game is different enough that the old Savage numbers and change to demons felt balanced, but public is in a very different space right now, so this should work better for the public game. Interesting. That's interesting that they would say that. And the change to demons felt balanced. So they weren't even thinking about this as a bug. Which can happen sometimes, because sometimes a bug can arise and then you can be like, well, it is a bug and it's not intended, but maybe we can keep the game like this and just alter the UI to be more accurate, because maybe they don't want two of the same types of demons to not invalidate the alliance. Honestly, I kind of suspect that might be slightly better design. It's like, it depends. I mean, whether they want two of the same demon to work on the same board, like, is up to them. But at the end of the day, it just needs to be clear with how the rules work. And it has been bugged for several weeks now, like 3 or 4 weeks. Okay. So, yeah, that's the patch in a nutshell. Didn't change all so much. Hopefully, you learned at least a little something. And, yeah, I don't think there's too much to go on about. Good stuff is a bit better. So this kind of happens in every update, by the way. Every single update, there's a pattern of like 3 things. They okay. So yeah, they're basically gonna kind of like accidentally buff good stuff. They're gonna fix a bug, and they're gonna have like a pun name. And this happens like basically almost universally. It's like it's actually kind of crazy. So yeah, let's look back earlier. Just to finish this off, let's look back. What am I thinking? So I think it happens on your average patch here. Okay, so let's look at this patch. We're liking this update, September 26th. So this was what, 2 weeks ago? Okay, so pun name, Axe is a bit better. Disrupt is a bit worse. This one was actually like potentially a good stuff nerf. Tusk is a bit better. Okay, this is the one that actually nerfs good stuff. Here we go. Like Slardar gets a bit better, and Slardar is just running like level value good stuff warriors. And Contract gets a bit worse, which doesn't change anything. Alright, this was just the one yesterday. I guess I'm thinking of older updates. But yeah, that's basically it. There's nothing else to see here. I'll mess around with Savage a little bit. Early Savage could get places. I still think that roll value builds are fundamentally weaker than level value builds, so I think Savage has to be strongest in a transitional capacity, rather than going for like a 3-star Lycan and trying to ride 4 Savages into the sunset. But yeah. That's gonna be it. So yeah. A lot of people are disappointed with the update. At the very least, like at the end here, it's like the Savage change might give people at least a few games of messing around with them. They're not gonna be good, they're not gonna disrupt the meta, but they might be playable, so it gives people a new option, and that makes people happy, so I like that. But at the same time, I mean, I think it's a pretty notable buff to good stuff, and that's hard to ignore. It's like when you look at the 2 non-Savage changes. So first of all, Savages exists in its best concept as a transition point into good stuff. That is where Savages shined, because Savages is good early, and good stuff board doesn't really exist early. A couple of the units can, now that we're running 6 warriors. It's like Slardar and Pudge do exist early. Even Witch Doctor, though it's at your end game board, you kind of never run it until like round 20 at the earliest. Witch Doctor just is more of a late game concept that isn't super, early skewed. So yeah, like Savage has always been in its best form when it's a transitional point for good stuff. Because it just falls off, and you're gonna need to transition it into something. And what better thing? I mean, good stuff is the ultimate transition build. That's the one downside of good stuff, is that you can't really run it early. You're gonna need to transition something into it, which is like either 3 warriors or 6 warriors using different warriors, or Savage, but now maybe we have that option. Demon Change is actually a pretty notable like 6 warrior good stuff buff.
Like, the ability for you to run 2 Dooms on your board is unironically good. I'm not even like joking. Like that is actually a buff. That's a pretty big buff. And then the last change is, of course, Lone Druid Spirit Bearer, which, even if you're not in like 4 Savages, this is still, you can kind of only run. It's another transitional card. It's something that's gonna fall off, so it's definitely best used in good stuff, even probably more so than 4 Savage. Because like if I find this early, maybe I can replace my Treant, or maybe I can go like Treant Lone Druid instead of Enchantress Treant, because Treant Lone Druid are just 2 individually good units. So, yep. That'll definitely be there. So yeah, I don't think there's any like, there's no kind of redeeming this meta. Like if you want to climb, you're gonna be a good stuff player. That is kind of how it's gonna be. You know, we've all committed ourselves to that fate. That being said, I mean, you can play other strategies and still climb. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, you can win with anything, especially if you're at like a fairly low rank. You can hit Lord with basically whatever you want. I don't want you guys to always feel pressured to like feel like you have to play good stuff. I feel like I'm pressured in that way because I want to reach like high ranks fast, and that's the best way to do it, right? But that's because I'm fighting for, like, you know, I want to go top 100 today, I want to go top 50 tomorrow, you know, so on and so forth, right? Whereas, you know, that's kind of more my problem. If you're just trying to hit Lord, you should not be feeling, oh, I have to play good stuff. It'll get you either the fastest, the most reliably, and the easiest, but some players might say you'll become a better player if you get Lord by not just jamming good stuff every game, right? Etc. So don't feel like you have to do it. I don't want to like pass that pressure along to all of you guys. Some of you will feel that way, but there's a lot of players that would rather have some fun at the cost of just a few percentage points off of an effective win rate, and I don't want to. I don't want to dismiss that. All right.